My name is Edwin Ragas. I am an associate director at the Wasserman Center for Career Development at the School of Professional Studies. I'm so excited to be hosting today's event. This is part of Virtual Career Week, which kicks off today. This is a week of events around recruitment and career education that is spearheaded by the Wasserman Center for Career Development. So please be sure to log into Handshake to see all the other events that are happening this week. So for today's event, it's called Job Skills to Succeed in a Post-Coronavirus World. Why are we talking about this today? No surprise. Just backing up for a few, this was inspired by a Forbes article that was written in April 2020 by a writer by the name of Bernard Marr with the title Job Skills to Succeed in a Post-Coronavirus World. Where our world of work and life has changed. And as we come out on the other side, we want to make sure that we're all positioned for success. And so enter our experts today, who will briefly give an overview of 3 skills from the list that appeared in Forbes. They're giving an overview of 3 skills: creativity and innovation, adaptability and flexibility, and emotional intelligence and leadership. And the takeaway here is hopefully you will all find ways to develop and apply these skills into your own circumstances, no matter where you are in your career or where you are in your life stage. So how this is going to work, our 3 speakers will take turns giving you sort of TED Talk style presentations about their particular expertise or area of focus. We're gonna try to work in some time in between each speaker for maybe 1 or 2 questions that are pertinent to them. And then we'll transition to the next speaker. And then if we have time at the end, we'll try to do a larger group Q&A or discussion. But you should be able to type in questions through the chat function or the Q&A function, whatever you see there, and we'll try to get them answered. We are recording the session. It's going to be available on NYU Stream, so please look out for that. So with that, I am going to introduce our first speaker, Mark Garcia. Mark Garcia is Vice President and Creative Director at Majestic, which is a New York-based company that builds technologies to enable the innovation of businesses looking towards the future. So sounds very much in line with what we need to be talking about today. He's going to dive into creativity and innovation with us. So with that, I turn it over to Mark.
There we go. Thank you for that introduction about the topic of creativity and innovation. I'm really excited to be here today to talk to you guys. Before I dive into things, I just wanted to throw my Twitter handle up on screen. If at any point during this presentation or after the fact you guys have any questions for me, feel free to reach out to me and I will get back to you as soon as I can. But a little bit about me. My name is Mark Garcia. I am the Vice President and Creative Director for Majestic. Majestic is a digital studio here in New York, and we develop tech-based solutions and products for our partners and clients. My role specifically is focused on visual design and user experience. So for those of you not familiar with that term, user experience, it is really focused on understanding the way people interact with the digital product, the psychology behind decision-making, and then designing an experience around that knowledge, whether it be something like an app or a website. Just to give you a little bit more concrete examples of some of the work I do, I just mentioned I have a lot of work in the mobile app and website space. This particular example is Audiomack. It's a free music streaming service that we designed. I've done work in the wearable space as well. This product was actually interesting. It was designed for the visually impaired. It was developed to help them navigate through physical space using touch-based directions, haptic feedback, vibrations, and sensors that were built into the device. And it was all connected through a mobile app. And beyond that, I've also had a lot of experience with connected devices as a whole. This is actually a smart toy that we produced ourselves. The best way to describe it, it was like a Siri for kids that was meant to learn and grow the more a child interacted with it. And this itself was actually connected to an ecosystem of digital touchpoints that included web-based dashboards for both parents and children, as well as a mobile app, etc. So I've had the opportunity to work on some really fun products that push the envelope in terms of the way we use and harness technology. So I'm excited to talk to you guys about this topic today because as you can see, it's really ingrained in my day-to-day life. And I think what excites me really more about it is that creativity and innovation is not exclusive to my field of work. It's not exclusive to being a designer or working in technology. With the pandemic and the quarantine disrupting our way of life, I believe we're currently living in one of the most innovative times that we're going to see in our lifetime. We're experiencing rapid moments of innovation as businesses are constantly meeting the needs and adapting to the new consumer behavior. And what the pandemic has done is it's really forced everybody to have to get creative and innovative, and within a very short period of time. So you guys are seeing the ingenuity of businesses every single day. And whether you're conscious of it or not, you're innovating every day as well. And you're participating in this shift in the way that we live, and you might not even know it. If any of you are members of a gym or you take fitness classes, our entire health and wellness industry has undergone a huge surge in innovation, especially towards digital. Traditional gyms and in-person classes quickly transitioned to being online, to going digital. Zoom workouts became a thing. Brands were producing a ton of video content that they weren't producing before. You had personal trainers putting up workouts onto their Instagram stories. And so Instagram became a hub for health and wellness. And then things like telehealth and virtual wellness consultations really grew in popularity because of the situation. So if fitness isn't your thing, I'm sure you can really relate to eating out in New York, right? Our food and dining industry has radically changed in these past couple of months. The biggest question that restaurant owners and business owners had to answer was, how do we continue to operate if dining out is not a thing, if people are being forced to stay home, right? So restaurants had to get really creative in how they operated and how they reached their consumer, and they had to innovate their operations. The first wave of that, of course, appeared with restaurants just making a shift towards being accessible and being able to have their menus available for delivery and takeout. Then we had new regulations come on board, and you had to-go drinks becoming a thing where restaurants set up makeshift bars right off of their sidewalks and sold drinks to go. And then in the past couple months, we've seen outdoor dining become a very real thing, and it's actually changed the way that our city looks. You have restaurants setting up tables and sidewalks and building barricades in the middle of the street. You have them getting really innovative with the very small amount of real estate that they have and trying to bring in as many consumers and customers as possible. So these are all prime examples of businesses and people thinking out of the box, getting creative with how they operate and how they reach their consumer. But on an individual level, how does one be more actively innovative? How do you set yourself up to be more creative in your daily life? I have 4 key concepts that I hope will inspire you to be more creative in your life and to foster an innovative mindset. The first concept is this idea that not everything is precious. As a designer and as a creative, I have a tendency to want to be pixel perfect in my design. Creatives in general, before putting our ideas out there, before putting ourselves out into the world, we're constantly striving to present the best, the most edited, perfect version of ourselves as possible. And this is a sentiment that really everyone can relate to. You don't have to just be a creative or designer. A prime example, I would say, is the Instagram culture. How many times have you taken a photo, but you've spent hours photo editing it and writing the perfect caption and finding the perfect hashtag? So this concept battles against that idea of perfection, because if you put too much stock into the work that you're doing, you really start to put your work up onto a pedestal and it becomes really close to your heart. And eventually what happens is you reach a point where your work will just never be good enough because all you're focused on are the imperfections. And so you never share it. You never put it out there into the world, which is completely counterintuitive to the creation and innovation process. What you have to understand is that not everything you do is precious. Not every idea is something that people will buy into or even like. If you want to be creative, if you want to be truly innovative, you need to be willing to put things out there. You have to be willing to allow yourselves to make mistakes and to embrace imperfection. And then more importantly, you really have to allow yourself to learn from your mistakes and continuously work toward improving your process, shifting and pivoting your ideas, and working toward that big creative idea versus waiting for an aha moment to strike. That really lends me into my second concept, which is to strive for an MVP. In technology, the startup world, and product design, we have this concept of an MVP, or a minimum viable product. The concept behind it is to create a product, an item, a thing that has the bare minimum feature set while also still delivering immediate impact. So let's explain. Say you're trying to solve the problem of transportation and you want to solve the problem of getting someone from point A to point B as fast as possible. You say to yourself, great, I'm going to make a car. The normal standard mentality is centered around an idea of a big bang delivery, where you're going to build something until it's 100% complete, and then you deliver it at the end. An MVP mental model would look at this process and say, well, that works, but it's going to take me a year to get there. I can't deliver anything in between that would make my customer happy. So how can I alleviate that problem now? So here with an MVP model, we focus on the underlying need that a customer wants fulfilled, which is to get to point A to be fast. And a car just so happens to be one possible solution to that. So an MVP model is all about delivering something sooner that meets the needs of your customer and then learning from it and iterating upon it. So how does this really benefit you? By putting something out there faster, you're able to get more feedback sooner. And that feedback is really crucial because it can tell you if you're on the right path, if you need to pivot, if you need to change your idea. It can help you make smarter decisions moving forward. And as a result of that, it's going to minimize the number of wasted hours you spent because you are more focused on incremental deliveries and smaller deliveries versus a big bang delivery at the end. My third concept for you guys is to overcome imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is a phenomenon where a person thinks that they don't deserve the success they receive. You know, you have this inner dialogue with yourself that says, I was just lucky, or my boss is going to realize I'm not as smart as I seem, or I have no idea what I am doing, and that was just a stroke of luck. That is what imposter syndrome is. And according to research, about 70% of people will experience imposter syndrome feelings at some point in their life. The core of the matter is that it's impossible to do something impactful, innovative, creative, without sometimes feeling like a fraud or like you have no idea what you're doing at all. But that's a really good feeling to have, and it's one that you have to learn to overcome because it indicates that you're challenging yourself. You know, if you're interested in personal growth, you'll always want to be pushing yourself into new and unexplored territories because that means that's where you're going to be innovating, where you're going to have to find creative solutions to those problems. And so you have to be okay with being uncomfortable because that signals you're gaining experience. The pandemic is offering a really unique opportunity right now because everybody is trying to figure out what the future looks like. What is the future of education? What is the future of work, of fitness, of our dining industry? So people, businesses, bosses, peers, mentors, everybody wants creative solutions right now. So if there was ever a time where you had an idea, where you wanted to be more creative, this is the period where you should really be tackling that and putting those ideas out to the world because that is what everybody's trying to do. And we're all really in the same boat. So that leads me to my last concept, which is the do something principle. I wish I could say I came up with this myself, but I didn't. It was actually put together by an author named Mark Manson. And what the theory says is that action isn't just the effect of motivation, it's also the cause of it. Right, so let's break that down for you guys to understand. So most people only commit to action if they feel a certain level of motivation, right? I think a lot of us can relate to that sentiment of waiting for inspiration to strike or waiting to feel motivated before actually doing something. And what that leads to a lot of the times is actually just procrastinating and putting things off till the last minute. But the thing about motivation is that it's not just this three-part chain, but it's actually an endless loop, right? So you feel inspired or you feel motivated, so you do something, which inspires you again, and you feel more motivation and you continue to act upon it. And it's an endless chain that keeps going and going and going. But when you back out and you look at the motivation chain this way, you can actually reorient your mindset to the following. Action leads to inspiration, which leads to motivation. So what Mark Manson found was that often when somebody did something, even the smallest of actions, it would soon give them the inspiration and the motivation to do something else. It sent a signal to themselves that said, okay, I just did that. I guess I can do more. Think about that in your own lives. Say you're trying to spring clean, you look at your entire apartment and you just say to yourself, oh, like, that's a lot for me to tackle. I'm not going to do it. But if you start small and say you organize one dresser in a closet or in a unit, accomplishing that will really leave you with a feeling of feeling inspired and motivating to want to do more. And when it comes to creativity and innovation, I think there's a misconception that to really be creative and innovative, you need to have $1 million idea as a foundation for whatever you're doing. And that's really not the case. Brilliant ideas always come as a cause of working on a smaller scale. By starting small, by getting smaller actions done, it inspires you and motivates you to take on more, to really work towards that lofty idea. So if you have an idea, if you have a concept, if you're working on a big project, a thesis, start small, take small actions, and those small actions will really lead to more inspiration down the line and more motivation. I know I threw a lot of concepts out at you, but I do want to wrap up with some practical tips on applying these into your actual life. So in the classroom, what I would say is share your work and share it often. Whatever you're working on, get feedback from whoever is willing to give it. Whether it's a professor, a parent, a mentee, a peer, share your work and don't wait for that big bang delivery. Because when you get that really early feedback, you're able to make more educated choices and smarter decisions moving forward. In your jobs and internships, I'm sure you've heard this before and people might advise you against it, but fake it until you make it. Before you're able to be really good at something, you're probably going to be really bad at it at first. But don't let the fear of failure hold you back. You have to be willing to put yourselves out there, to be in an uncomfortable situation, to gain the experience that you need and to be where you want to be. You have to make mistakes to be able to learn. And lastly, just in life, I'm going to borrow from Mikey, just do it. Taking small actions now will have a compound effect in your future. The more you're able to accomplish and get done, no matter how small, it will really pave the way for you moving forward. So taking that small action will really empower you and make you feel inspired in the long run. So don't wait for those big aha moments. Don't wait for the creativity to strike. Start small, break down your tasks and ideas into smaller deliverables, and then start working at it that way, and that'll really help you get going to where you want to be. So that's everything I have right now. Here are my handles again if you want to get in touch with me with any questions outside of this. And Gino, I'm going to pass it back over to you.
Thanks so much, Mark. That was really great. Thanks for sticking to the time too. So I love what you said about all of these concepts. I do want to make sure that folks in the room know you can absolutely type in questions as the speakers are presenting, and we'll try to get to them as we see them. Mark's going to stick around, and hopefully we'll have some time at the end for questions. But just some of my takeaways from what Mark said is all of these things can be applied to our own circumstances. And if you think Mark works with a team that they have to come up with solutions for a problem and a product, right? And I guess the challenge is for us to think about our lives as the product and apply some of these concepts that Mark shared. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our next speaker, Beth Wade. Beth Wade is currently a consulting manager within the talent and organizations and human potential practice of Accenture. Beth is the perfect person to speak on this topic with us today, as she herself has navigated several changes throughout her career, from working in marketing to then transitioning to career coaching and business operations with the U.S. Air Force Academy and the University of Denver, and now she is at Accenture. And so with that, I am happy to introduce you to Beth Wade. Who will unmute her mic in a few.
Yes, sorry, my Zoom went away. Hold on. Okay, so hopefully you can all see my screen. So yes, thank you, Edwin. I appreciate that introduction, and I couldn't have asked for a more perfect introduction than Mark's presentation. You would think we had coordinated this. I'm really excited to be here, and Mark, you gave a great lead in to action and change, which is what I'll be talking about today. First, I want to address some of the kind of housekeeping stuff. I need to talk to Accenture, right? So I am part of the Accenture team. Accenture, in case you aren't aware, is a leading global professional services company, consulting, which provides a broad range of services in strategy and consulting, interactive technology and operations, and digital capabilities. We combine unmatched experience and specialized capabilities across 40 industries. We work in over 120 countries, and we have over 513,000 employees. So we're a rather large company, which can tend to lose the human component. But rather, what I appreciate about being part of Accenture is the human-centric focus beyond technology. So rather than creating technology that people need to adapt to, which is what we're here to talk about today, right? We are constantly innovating technology that adapts to the way that humans live and work. So as part of Accenture's talent and organizations team, human potential strategy and practice, I work with clients to plan and execute initiatives for organizational change, workforce, new and reskilling, talent strategy, and applied behavioral science. So as Edwin mentioned, prior to Accenture, I worked in corporate, military, nonprofit, higher education, and most recently, the reason why some of this makes sense for why you're here today is I just came out of a profession as a career professional development coach for the University of Denver with a concentration on business students and students with learning and physical differences. And I am also currently a master's student in organizational leadership. So personally, I think I'm in this career field because I consider myself to be quite lucky to have been confronted with constant change in my career. Some of it was out of my control, some of it not, including being part of the last recession. So I can empathize with all of you as you prepare to transition into an uncertain and transforming workforce. So as I'm faced with change, I tend to leverage my inclination towards positivity and problem solving. I know that's not something everyone is equipped with, but we'll try to give you some tools today to help you manage through that. And the reason why we're talking about change as part of flexibility and adaptability is because the reason why we need to be flexible and adaptable is because we face constant change, right? So we'll talk about not living in doubt, acknowledging change, and then taking the steps to move past it. And we'll talk about career development through the lens of change management, because at its core, change management really is just the process of changing individual behavior to work towards a shifted goal. So applying these principles of change as a way to enhance your abilities to manage and control your career to ensure better outcomes is really very appropriate. So before we get into the serious stuff, I want to share with you a video, and I know it's silly, but afterwards we'll examine how the change management process was really cloaked quite effectively with relatable comedy. So as you watch this, hopefully you're at least familiar with Friends. If you grew up as a millennial, even an old millennial like myself, you were probably obsessed with it. So as you watch, try to identify the change behaviors that these characters exhibit, including leadership, planning, execution, and resistance. So let's move into the video really quickly.
I brought rain. Oh, I see. I thought you just really, really liked your new couch.
Just follow my lead.
Okay.
Come on, Shirley. All right.
Okay.
Here we go. All right. Ready? Yeah. Turn. Okay. Turn. Turn.
I don't think we can turn anymore.
I just don't think it's gonna fit.
Oh, yeah, it will. Come on, up, 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 up. Yes. Here we go. Pivot. 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 Pivot.
Shut up! Shut up! Shut up!
Okay, I don't think it's gonna pivot anymore.
You think?
All right, let's bring it back down and try again.
Okay.
Oh.
Okay, yeah, I think it's really stuck now.
I can't believe that didn't work.
I know, me neither. I mean, you had a sketch.
Oh, now what did you mean when you said pivot?
Okay, so the reason I wanted to share that video with you all, and let me bring back my presentation. The reason I wanted to share that video with you all was because when we talk about change management, it's often, we see it in our everyday lives, right? We see it in the way that we do things. Oh.
You want to see some action?
Always technology.
Everybody strap in.
There we go. Netflix is relentless. Okay. So as we talk about change and managing change in our everyday lives, we tend to encounter it in kind of everything we do. And you could see there were some principles exhibited there, right? We have, leadership, they had a sketch, they had a plan, and they were going according to it. But then as the circumstances changed, they were unwilling to do exactly what the characters were talking about, which was pivot, right? They had a plan, they were executing it, but when it came time for the plan that needed to adapt, they were unwilling to do that. And then you could see in, if you know the two characters that were at the bottom, Rachel and Chandler, they were unclear on the goals, right? And they didn't understand because there was a plan. Why weren't things working? So we'll talk a little bit about, how we can be flexible, how we can be adaptable. And instead of allowing change to unravel you, we'll outline a few ways that you can direct your energy to unravel, make sense of it, and be successful. So we'll talk first about identifying the causes of change resistance, how you can create some pathways for change success in your own life, and then reinforce sustainable positive change behaviors. So before we begin, I think it's important to call out the semantics of our word choices today. Words carry deep meaning, and it's important that we not use distinctively different words interchangeably. So there are some temporal differences between flexibility and adaptability, and functional differences between flexing, adapting, pivoting, and changing. So flexing carries a connotation of one-off change. So perhaps a friend asks you to meet them for dinner 30 minutes later than you originally planned, or at a different restaurant, you can be flexible. Adapting insinuates a long-term or more deeply rooted ability to accept change. So perhaps that same friend consistently changes the time or location. So you prepare multiple wardrobe options and don't plan anything after dinner because you know the time could potentially shift. Pivoting presents yet another slight change in semantics. So when we pivot, we're keeping one foot in the same place and moving the other to change our position, right? When we physically pivot. So perhaps using that same example, you pivot by selecting an outfit that can be dressed up or down, and then plan to work on other things until you receive confirmation, and then you can pick up and go. Changing carries with it even a deeper meaning, a more profound and lasting impact. So change requires a shift or a transformation of your mindset. The anticipated effort and permanency of change are the qualities that activate emotion in us. So in our professional lives, when we become familiar with each of these, perhaps more than some of us would like to. And for a group of students who are pursuing education, many while working during the COVID area, I don't need to tell you that change is inevitable, but that's why we're here today, right? So not only listening to the topics presented, but here in this virtual world. And we've all been asked to be flexible with regards to the way we work from home, using virtual tools, limiting our social interactions. We're all also being asked to adapt, right? Our work styles, our communication styles, the way we search for jobs, the way we interview, and then depending on your goals, you may even need to pivot or change your search, right? If the jobs you intended to pursue look different now or they just don't exist anymore. So in the shared experience of the pandemic, many people actively resist the changes that are thrust upon the workforce, but why? So let's talk about some of the reasons humans are inclined to resist change. So as you examine this list, some may be obvious, right? You'll notice that fear is the basis of several change acceptance practices. It's important to note that even in an argument in favor of change, we have to admit that many reasons for change resistance are not only valid, but reasonable. So all of your emotions are valid. So resistance to change is natural, even when it's not beneficial. Emotionally mature people learn to identify and manage their emotions that create those barriers to growth. So there is a requirement for emotional intelligence in change, especially when we're talking about our own careers and self-awareness. That's key. So what emotions are you experiencing? Why are you experiencing? And are they helpful or harmful in the given situation? So most of the negativity that encompasses change is difficult to overcome lives in this list, right? It's critical to dig deep to understand the why of why we resist change before we attempt to overcome it. If we don't, we're kind of fighting an unknown enemy, right? We may be fighting blindfolded. So if your reaction to change is over the top, you're being triggered, right? If you experience change or something interrupts your plan, and you overreact, or you act in a very emotional way, a way that is atypical of how another person might act, it's important that you retrain your brain to associate that change with positive outcomes or potentially positive outcomes. So some of these include, right, lack of self-efficacy or perceived self-efficacy. So your capability of managing a problem to a positive outcome. Fear of failure. So, a lot of us have that fear of failure, that's self-explanatory. Perceived loss of control, something you thought was in your control is no longer there. Ambiguity or uncertainty would encompass, you're not sure what's going to happen, or change is happening to you. There's no reward or incentive. Maybe you expected a certain salary after graduation, and now that the workforce has changed, maybe that number has lowered, and that's no longer an incentive to pursue a certain career. Distrust in your own ability to manage change in your own life, or maybe you just had a bad experience with change in the past, or maybe this has happened. I know kind of going into this change, I got a little worked up myself, because fresh out of college, when I graduated during the recession in 2008, I was brought onto a corporation, and 7 months later I was laid off. So when this pandemic hit and I had just started with a new organization, I of course had this negative kind of feeling come up that, oh my gosh, this is happening again. But I had to overcome that, because past experiences don't have to dictate future experiences. So we can make more clear success pathways and break away from that adhering to the old. So when we talk about behavioral science, how it affects us, how we can manage change better in our lives, it's really just the flip of that, right? We ask ourselves the questions to really dig deep and find out why we're so averse to change, or what's negative about the change, and basically just spin it into a positive, right? We learn to trust ourselves. We do that by making small changes to our daily routines. It's a really easy way to rewire our brains to make more adaptable neurons. It's a scientific fact that we can rewire our brains, create new neural pathways by making small, incremental, and frequent repetitious changes. So can you take a different way to work every day or school? Can you change up the kind of coffee that you drink every day? Can you work out at night rather than in the morning? Doing things like that, kind of incentivizing yourself with small change, and then helping your brain make the connection between change and positive outcomes, or even neutral outcomes, right? It doesn't affect you negatively if you walk a different way to work, because you'll still get there. So retraining your brain to understand that change does not have to have a negative impact is really important, and helps assign meaning to the change, right? What does change actually mean when it's happening to you? What could it mean? So how do you identify the potential value in that? How do you exercise whatever control you have? And how do you acknowledge the impact without dwelling on it? Sometimes there is a negative impact, right? Our emotions, again, are valid. So how do you focus on acknowledging the impact and how you can control what you can control, but not dwell on the negative? And then reducing social stimuli is really important, right? Because sometimes we get into a pattern of groupthink, or if there are other people who are kind of going through the same situation as us, we tend to get together and commiserate, right? Misery loves company. So we tend to get together and we complain and we talk about all the bad stuff that's happening. But if we really can take a step back and be introspective about how we're approaching change and how it really impacts our own lives, without all of the noise of everyone else's change experience, we can start to kind of clarify our path forward, and we can start to avoid the old ways of doing things and enable ourselves to move towards that new way of doing it. So what we're talking about is working towards change maturity. So when we talk about flexibility and adaptability, it's on a spectrum, right? So there's stagnant change, that's letting change happen to you, right? And it elicits a fight or flight response. So you may stay and fight it, but you may be angry about it. Or you may just run away. You may just say, I'm not going to deal with this now. It's too much. It's overwhelming. But the thing is, the change is still there, right? So if we take these steps and you can move your arrow along this spectrum towards change maturity, away from stagnancy, away from not doing anything, we can slowly become more flexible, more adaptable, and eventually when change happens, we can just naturally start enabling those behaviors that we've done on a very small scale, right? Like walking to work and changing up your daily routine in a small way. We can reduce that threat to our basic needs so we can eliminate that survival instinct that we have to fight or flight. And we can make sure that our kind of id is taken care of. We can reframe the change so we can actually visualize. Visual motor rehearsal is incredibly important. If we can visualize what our life looks like after the change, if we can visualize what steps we're taking to manage through, it can be a very effective way of seeing our success. And then establishing clear goals and milestones that connect directly to action, right? SMART goals is something that people often are familiar with. And then celebrating those small wins to instill trust in yourself. And then, we just always need to get rid of those old or unhelpful behaviors. So the goal here is to move along this spectrum. So we all know careers are dynamic, right? They're not linear. Oftentimes, right, we feel like, I studied this in school, and so this is what I need to do. That's not really the way the workforce is structured anymore, right? A history major can work in HR. It doesn't matter if you studied sociology and math, you can certainly become a technology consultant. It doesn't matter. It's about the skills that you apply, and it's your ability to flex and adapt and change to the changing environment around you. The self-awareness comes in understanding your change triggers and the behaviors that result from that. So what is it that's making you anxious or fearful? Can you identify that? And then can you take control of what you're able to? Really just trust in your abilities to be successful in any context. It kind of goes back to what Mark was saying, right, about imposter syndrome. And ignore imposter syndrome. You are where you are because that's where you're supposed to be. So trust in your capabilities to be successful, and go beyond whatever the change is kind of triggering inside of you, whatever negative feelings that's triggering. So I'll end with one of my favorite quotes by Dwight D. Eisenhower. It says, "Plans are nothing and planning is everything." And while it's so simple, we may not know when or how change will come. Even in ambiguity, we can prepare ourselves. We can constantly test our ability to change. We can realign our perception of change with positive outcomes. And then when we encounter a bigger life impacting change, we're better equipped with those personal change practices that we can fall back on. So we can say, I won't let this change set me back because I've done this many times before and I've been successful. So I can trust in myself that I can be successful again. And then, just kind of similarly to the way Mark ended as well, right? The goal is just to begin, right? Any action, I say this all the time when I was working with students, when I work with people in change, they get caught up in kind of an analysis paralysis. And while it's good to evaluate where you are and where you want to go, the first step is just to start. So any action is better than inaction. So thank you for sharing some time with me today. I really appreciate having the opportunity to talk with you all on this topic. It's something that I'm very passionate about, especially as change applies to career development. So like I think all of the rest of the speakers, please feel free to ask questions, to follow up with me afterwards. I'm happy to connect with all of you. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Beth. We are going to do a quick change to Josh, our next speaker. Again, folks, I want to remind you that feel free to type in questions in the chat box for any of the panelists. We're looking at it, so we're able to respond. And Josh is setting up his slides. So Josh Tecchio is a Senior Vice President in the Transformative Leadership Unit at AlixPartners, which is a management consulting firm. Josh and his team help the leaders of top companies in a variety of sectors be better leaders. So it is a real treat for us to get a sample of his work today around emotional intelligence and leadership. So with that, here is Josh Tecchio.
Thank you, Edwin, and thank you, Beth and Mark, for two fantastic presentations. I think I'm going to continue on the thread. This has been a pretty wonderful progression of topics. So kudos to Edwin for putting together, just a really great progression of how we understand not only ourselves, but the teams on which we work. And I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into a topic that we've sort of been tangentially speaking on, and that's the topic of emotional intelligence. So hello everyone. It is an absolute delight to be with you. My name is Josh Tecchio, and as Edwin said, I'm a Senior Vice President at Alex Partners within our Transformative Leadership practice and the Head of Executive Assessment. A little bit on my firm. We were founded now almost about 40 years ago by Jay Alex on our bankruptcy practice, with the firm now being the preeminent management consulting firm for turnaround and restructuring globally. We've built out significantly over the last 40 years, adding practices on enterprise improvement, digital capabilities, litigation, and the practice that I'm part of, transformative leadership. Within my practice, we work with private equity and corporate clients to find solutions to their most pressing people issues. And for the purposes of today, people is going to be the answer to a very important question. Given the degree of transformation that was occurring before the pandemic hit, and how we've watched corporate transformation explode over the last 6 months, what is going to be the defining factor that will determine the sustainability of all of this change? It's people, it's talent. And great talent requires transformative leadership to sustain and support large-scale change within business. So let's get into why. We are witnessing a unique situation that requires a unique form of leadership. The crisis that we all currently find ourselves in is different from any recent crisis, one that has impacted both supply and demand simultaneously and is in a state of constant flux, making it very difficult to forecast any sort of performance metrics or the evolution of the crisis itself. And this is all surrounded by uncertainty around the shape of our recovery, its timing, with many noting that if the fundamentals of the current situation remain solid, that we could very well be looking at a V-shaped recovery, God willing, and seeing the disruption end with the resolution of the crisis. However, a prolonged disruption, which is very possible, could lead to a recession, which would lead to an inevitable shift in business fundamentals and potentially a U or even an L-shaped recovery. So what does this mean? It means that we can no longer rely on business as usual models. It also means that we need leaders who can lead effectively in such a state of constant flux and ambiguity while still driving high performance with their people. To do this in such a scenario, emotional intelligence becomes a critical component of effective leadership. It is critical that leaders be able to read the room in order to manage the room. Demonstrating empathy, speed to action, decisiveness, and agility, like Beth was just speaking to, are the cornerstones of what it means to lead in today's day. Through these competencies, leaders must ensure that messaging and tone of their communications are both constructive and positive, so as to inspire and motivate others to maintain high performance. And regarding those communications, they need to do it more than ever. The stress of ambiguity is lessened when communication is constant, and preventing prolonged periods of stress is exactly what we want to do as aspiring leaders. At the end of this talk, I'll be leaving you with a slide on how to work on your emotional intelligence, with communication factoring in there very importantly. So what is emotional intelligence? Emotional intelligence is the ability to understand and manage your own emotions while recognizing and influencing the emotions and relationship dynamics of those around you. You need to be able to read the room, as I said, being able to connect with hearts and minds. Emotional intelligence is essential to good leadership now more than it has ever been, because it helps leaders capture hearts and minds. And hopefully over the next few minutes, I'll make that case for you. EQ, or emotional intelligence, and transformative leadership are crucial at this time because of the unprecedented disruptive situations that we're seeing now. We need to lead, we need to inspire, we need to motivate others. And EQ allows us to connect deeply with other employees, with clients, and with our teams. I also think that leadership itself is transforming as a result of this disruption. For those of you that are familiar with more traditional models of leadership, we've lived through decades of those. I think the transformative leadership model, which I'll explain in just a minute, is really the model of the future. But let's dig in a little bit and make sure that we're all on the same page on what emotional intelligence is. Many people equate emotional intelligence with a sense of empathy. Empathy is an extremely important part of emotional intelligence, but it's not the only part. The concept of EQ has been studied for over 30 years, and you can see here the 5 factors of emotional intelligence on this slide. One is self-awareness, the ability to recognize your own moods and your own emotional states, and really importantly, the ability to recognize the impact that your emotional states are having on other people. Self-regulation, what do you do with your own emotions? What do you do when you feel like being sarcastic or snarky or brisk or irritable? How do you behaviorally manage the way that you feel? Motivation is a huge component of emotional intelligence. Knowing what you're motivated by and communicating what motivates you to others so that they can understand and respond to you more effectively. Do they see you as motivated by power and status and money? Do they see you as motivated by purpose, by values? We learned from Aristotle that humans are meaning-seeking and meaning-creating beings. And we learned from Freud that there are 2 big areas in life, work and love. So in the work arena, leadership and emotional intelligence play a huge role in creating meaning at work, connecting why we're doing what we're doing to a meaning, and making explicit how that has an impact on our customers, on our clients, on each other, and on society writ large. Millennials, as my co-presenters have been talking about, and other generations want to work for companies where leaders' motivation is clear. And also, to be frank, noble, that it serves a higher purpose. Empathy, of course, is the crown jewel of the concept of emotional intelligence. And when we talk about empathy, we talk about 3 different types of empathy. We talk about cognitive empathy, we talk about emotional empathy, and we talk about compassionate empathy. So it's literally, can I put myself in the position of the other person? Can I walk in her shoes? Do I know what it feels like to be working from home right now, trying to get good work done with all of the other things that are going on? Can I feel what another person is feeling? And can I take the steps, compassionate empathy, to do something about it? Can I communicate this to others so that they understand that I'm feeling empathy for them? And then lastly, social skill. What do I do with people? Reading a room, how do I manage relationships? How do I build trust and find common ground? How do I reach out to people who are upset in light of the disruption that we're going through? There have been dozens and dozens of studies conducted on emotional intelligence, and some of the results might surprise you. People high in EQ have much higher job satisfaction, and the people that work for them also have higher job satisfaction. From a performance perspective, whether you're a CEO, a part of a management team, a sales professional, a teacher, a physician, individuals with high EQ perform better at work. It's also, interestingly enough, negatively correlated with job burnout. In other words, people who are high in EQ are more stress hardy. They're able to lead through disruption. They're able to connect with their people to give them hope and reinforce the values of the business and where it's headed, AKA that critical leadership function that we've been talking about. We're living in a world where diversity and inclusion and the creation and sustaining of cultures of diversity and inclusion are paramount for attracting, retaining, and developing top talent. Perhaps no surprise, high EQ leaders are really excelling in creating cultures like that. A couple years ago, there was a major study conducted across some very large companies. I'm sure that you'll recognize all of them: American Express, Pepsi, IBM, and Volvo, studying the effectiveness of senior executives, looking at their IQ, looking at their cognitive abilities, and looking at their emotional intelligence. And close to 90% of their success as executives across these 4 companies was attributable to their emotional intelligence. So I want to talk a little bit more about leadership writ large. The transformative leadership model is a model that we think is purpose-built for leading through periods of disruption and for supporting the sustainability of change. So these 5 mentions that you see here, and you'll see that strong EQ is 1 of 5, but it is just 1 of 5. We believe that these are the dimensions of leadership of the future. These types of leaders are best suited to the kinds of times we're living through now and will continue to be living through for many years, if not decades to come. Someone who can create a compelling and inspiring vision, who sets a strong personal example. More and more and more, we're looking to our leaders for authenticity, for ethics, for unquestionable integrity. We want to know their values. We want to know what they care about, thinking back earlier to what I said about leaders' motives. Transformative leaders can articulate the values and purpose of an organization, answering the why question. Why am I in this job? Why am I working for this company? Why should I stay at this company and not go to another one? The strong EQ piece is there, of course, and the 5th dimension in the transformative leadership model is the one around the commitment to learning and development. Always be learning, always be developing. There are a number of CEOs, I think, that have shown us positively what EQ and transformative leadership really look like. A few weeks ago, I don't know if any of you have seen or heard this, but Mary Barra, the CEO of General Motors, was on a podcast talking about how when people feel that they can bring their whole selves to work, that they bring their best selves to work. Now, that's an extraordinary thing for a leader to say. It's also an extraordinary thing for a company to create a culture that allows people to bring their best selves to work. In the future, organizations that are able to handle disruption and are able to sustain themselves in the wake of disruption need leaders like that. Mike Hoffman, the CEO of Cardinal Health, before the murder of George Floyd, took his senior executive team to the new National Museum for Peace and Justice. So we're seeing more and more CEOs stepping out of the traditional leadership role and sharing more of their personal values, stepping up, stepping in to what their people want and need out of them. So this last slide gives a high-level view of how you can work on your own emotional intelligence. I'm not going to go through each of these piece by piece, but I do think that this deck is going to be either made available to everyone on this session, or if not, you can feel free to reach out to me directly. My email will be on the next slide, and I'm happy to forward my slides to you. So I want to thank you all for this time, and I think more importantly, I want to wish you all great luck and great fortitude as you develop yourselves as transformative leaders. Back to you, Edwin.
Thanks so much, Josh. We did have a question that came in while you were presenting the slide that you had on when you were defining emotional intelligence. I think there was a question around, are those all equal parts that add up to emotional intelligence? Do you need more of one over the other? Can you just elaborate on that a little bit more?
It's a great question. The answer is a consultative answer. It's an and, right? So all things equal, yes, we have to give equal weight to each one of the different dimensions of emotional intelligence. But at the same time, we're all individuals, we're all human beings, and we all respond to and react to and implement our knowledge in different ways. So not everyone is going to be as good at self-awareness as they are at motivating others. Some people have a more developed sense of empathy than they do in actually dealing with people one-on-one. So, you know, the goal should be to increase your overall emotional intelligence. But if you think of all of these as subscales, there's going to be a bit of a slide, right? So you can increase on one and keep the same on the other. Keep strengths based as sort of your focus on developing your emotional intelligence. Whatever you're good at, get great at it. Whatever you're not so good at, as long as it's not totally derailing your ability to lead, you can probably leave that alone.
I'm on mute. We do have 5 minutes left, so I want to be respectful of time. I know this might be people's lunch hour, so we want to make full use of the time. Again, we invite you to type in your questions if you have any. Mark and Beth, if you could turn your screens on. Maybe that will help folks. Seeing you might encourage some questions.
I love your questions.
Yeah, and thank you for typing in the chat. I know some of the answers, the question and answer have been happening in the chat. I guess if I were to throw a question for each of you, and maybe this is like quick fire, like I also want to leave people with, you might be experts in your area, right? But are there, of these skills that we've highlighted, we talked about needing to constantly learn. Are there skills that you as professionals, are realizing like, hey, actually in this world of like being in a pandemic and my world of work has changed, I'm realizing like I'm not as equipped or skilled in, this part or this skill, just to kind of reinforce that you can be the best at what you do, but also still need, to develop in other areas. Maybe I'll throw it to Mark first.
Sure. Yeah, my quick answer to that I would say is, even as a seasoned leader, I think a big thing that a lot of us face is how do you communicate in this world where you don't get to see people and interact face to face, and how do you now transition to not relying on like physical cues and seeing people's reactions to things. And I think communication in this world of the pandemic and Zooms and phone calls has been a real big learning curve for myself. I'd say for a lot of people in terms of, what's the best way to interact with a boss or an employee? How do I get the feedback I need, but not be infringing on somebody's schedule or time? So I think learning how to communicate all over again in this world has been a big thing. I have been a manager. I feel like I know what I'm doing, and we got locked down, and a part of me was just like, how do I manage my team? And I think it's all trial and error, and everyone is figuring it out. So there's a sense of camaraderie in that learning process. So learning how to communicate, I think, is the biggest, I would say.
Okay, cool. Thanks for that. Beth?
Oh boy. I mean, I have made my career in education and training and speaking and networking. And this has really introduced some challenges, especially in a career field where I am helping others develop their talent strategy and build reward and incentive programs. Everything looks different. We can't take our preconceptions of how things used to be and just try to adapt them to the virtual world. That doesn't always work. So sometimes we actually are forced into innovating. What do they say? Invention is the result of necessity, right? We invent things because we need something different. And so in the face of all of these changes that are happening, we really have to just figure out a new way of doing things. Sometimes just adapting the old way doesn't work. And I would pair it what Mark says about communication, leadership, managing teams. Taking everything virtual has a very different impact on different personality types. So really being attentive to the human component of how change is affecting people. I don't tend to be, sorry, Josh, the most empathetic person. I have to work on my empathy constantly and really try to put myself in someone else's shoes and say, I see a toy on the floor in the background. They're probably also trying to teach a kid at the same time that they're frustrating me in this business meeting. So I need to kind of gather myself and control my own emotions around what's happening. And sometimes that takes more time, but it's just something we have to adapt to.
Thanks for that, Beth. And Josh, we'll close it off with you, something that you've realized in this time about yourself and how you're sort of coping and trying to be better.
Honestly, for me, it's trust. Trust has become the most important thing to me, both for my team, but also for the relationships that I have with my clients, that I have with other colleagues at my firm. Trust is sort of the foundation of whatever it means to do good work, but also to be a good person. And I think that a lot of us are really feeling at a loss for goodness in other people. So, when I look to build trust, I look at two things in particular. I look at integrity. I look at saying what I mean, meaning what I say. And I look at transparency, right? Which means, if I have a feeling about this, I should express that feeling. I shouldn't express fear. I should express concern, but I should be constantly telling people what is real, what they can expect, and I should be doing it often, because if I'm not, I'm very likely to cause them to feel a lot more stress than is probably helpful or productive. But nonetheless, you need to also make sure that what you communicate is clear, that it's not wishy-washy, that you're saying what is as opposed to what you hope to be. And through that, really create relationships of trust. And that's been the most important thing to me.
Thanks so much. Okay, and with that, we will end. I want to thank our guests again today, Mark Garcia, Beth Wade, and Josh Tecchio. Please be on the lookout for the recording of this so you can watch it back. But everyone, continue to stay safe and stay resilient, and we'll see you out there. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.